Hi, my name's Ed. I'm a junior doctor in the UK. You guys seem to really enjoy the medical TV drama reviews I do. I did the first one on House, which is a TV show I used to watch a lot before medical school, and the most recent one I did was of The Good Doctor, which was both really well received, so thank you very much. I thought I would indulge a little bit more down that sort of rabbit hole of medical TV dramas, and today talk about Scrubs. For those of you who don't know, Scrubs is an off-the-wall TV comedy series starring Zach Braff as John Dorian, or JD to his mates, and follows him finding his feet in his first few years on the wards as a medical doctor. It's widely cited as being one of the most accurate TV medical shows despite its eccentric humour. So you may be wondering, why is that? I think it's mainly because, unlike most medical dramas, the patients and the illnesses are not the main focus, so they don't need to come up with unrealistic, one in a million or miraculous cures to generate the plot. It's much more about JD's learning and his experiences, so him getting things wrong and learning from it. Today I rewatched the first episode of it. It's been a long time since I've seen it, and it was absolutely brilliant. So funny and genuinely insightful. It took me back a lot to my first day on the job. So I wanted to review the accuracy of it through the prism of my first day on the job, and believe me, there's weirdly enough loads of similarities. So let's dive into it then. Let's find out about the first episode of Scrubs.
Since I was a kid, I've been able to sleep through anything. Storms, sirens, you name it. Last night I didn't sleep.
Oh man, this takes me back to my very first day that I started on the ward. I did exactly this. I was so unbelievably nervous. I remember being awake way before my alarm woke up, you know, when you're just lying awake in bed, just checking the time, waiting for it to go off. And even though I'd set it super early so I wouldn't sleep in. But I didn't do this shaving foam bra though. I did have so much nervous energy then. I think I did some sort of early morning exercises like some push-ups and star jumps, which I never normally do.
It's my first day. I'm the man.
It's really interesting when he turns and said he's the man. Think of all the things that have changed from being a medical student to a doctor. I mean, I did a video last week, which you guys can check out up here, where I asked medical students how they were feeling about becoming a doctor. I remember a talk when I just started that was given by a surgeon. He asked us to list all the things that were different, and we all said things like money, regular hours, having to do nights and weekend work. But he said, nope, the biggest change is everything has changed. You're not just the man, you are the doctor. Our patient doesn't care if you're the doctor of 1 month or 10 years. You're their doctor, and that's what they see. So you've got to step up.
Made me realize one thing.
Good. Could you go drop an NG tube on the patient in 234 and call the attending if the lavage is positive?
I don't know jack.
This too was definitely my experience on my first day. I got to the ward 30 minutes early, which I wouldn't recommend to anyone, because guess what happened? I was given loads of jobs to do, really simple things now, but at the time, just like JD here, I didn't know jack. So far it's almost cringy how much this is my experience on my first day, and we haven't even got to the intro yet.
I can't do this all on my own. No, I know I'm no Superman. I'm no Superman.
It didn't really focus on patient care.
The hospital doesn't want to be sued. Being sued is not a good thing.
This is a really nice insight on what happens when you first start a new job actually. So whenever you start a new hospital, you have a few days of orientation, or induction we call it. And by this, I don't mean like where the canteen is, although that is pretty useful information, but things like how to use the computer system, where to get your ID card, things like fire policy, and also some pretty useful clinical things like, you know, how to label the blood transfusions properly and things like that, that may be specific to the hospital. For the most part, it's pretty dull, but it's a really good way to meet some of your colleagues in a less pressurized environment. Although I did have one placement where I was pulled out of induction because they were short on the wards. That was a bit of a baptism of fire.
Finally, doctors, if there is a mistake, don't admit it to the patient. Of course, if the patient is deceased, and you're sure, you can feel free to tell him or her.
Clearly, this is a bit of black humour. I mean, any mistakes that are made, patients need to be informed about it. And if necessary, the mistake needs to be escalated and recorded in some kind of reporting, usually by explaining to patients what has happened, why it happened, what is usually in place to stop it happening, and kind of what went wrong and why that won't go wrong again. That's usually enough to reassure them and build trust again.
We roomed together in college, we roomed together in med school. Hell, we even got accepted by the same hospital.
I love JD and Turk's relationship. We've all seen these kind of friendships out in the real world, and you know, the hospital's no different. We then go on a journey with JD as he meets some of the other quirky personalities of the other doctors.
I'm probably Miss Hyper-competitive. I mean, it used to be a big problem for me. Used to. Past tense.
Hey! Are we like racing? Please, I'm not that desperate.
Competitive people in medicine? No. Never. Pretty accurate. Although I would say it's more typical at medical school. There's no reason to be so directly competitive as a doctor because you're all kind of going in different directions. Whereas at medical school, because you're all competing for the same exams, it can be a little bit competitive.
Daddy, why did you marry Mommy?
Well, Tiger, I gave her an answer during rounds and she screwed my brains out.
Medical professionals marrying each other definitely happens. I remember when I started medical school, one of the first lectures I had, the lecturer said, look around the room and some of you will, you know, get married. And I remember thinking, I don't think any of this lot are going to get married, really. But yeah, sure enough, they were right.
I am your resident, Dr. Jeffrey Stedman.
You ever notice how quickly some people make an impression?
I'm a tool. I'm a tool. I'm a tool.
The thing is, it's not like doctors are different than any other people, and we need a broad range of personalities to suit all the different specialties in medicine. So a GP, a family doctor is very different to a surgeon, very different to a pathologist, very different to a microbiologist. And also, all kind of doctors work with the public, and therefore we need to relate and treat to everyone who is in the general public as well.
I'm a tool. I'm a tool. I'm a tool.
And the knock-on effect of having every kind of personality within the profession means some of us are going to be tools. So then JD has to do his ward jobs for the first time.
Place an IV for me. We'll talk later. Come on, you've done this to cadavers before, so this guy's alive. Just poke it through his skin. Poke it through!
Urinary catheters, blood taking, prescribing medication. These are all things that you become comfortable with very quickly, but before you do, doing things for the first time, you feel like the patient's staring at you when they're doing it, and you feel much more about you rather than thinking about just getting it done for the patient.
Time's up. Carla, would you do it for him, please? I'm also going to need an ABG.
Why are you telling her?
Shut up and watch.
I remember being really slow when I was asked to take blood or put a catheter in, just being very slow putting all my gear together because I was sort of slightly dreading it, and also playing it through in my mind exactly what I was going to do. So those first few times you do stuff is always very nervous, and to be honest, when I do stuff now that's, you know, at the limit of my capability, I still have that same kind of dread. But it is a lot easier once you become more proficient at certain things. You don't spend as much energy thinking about them, and you can kind of get on with your day a bit better, and that makes you more relaxed and actually a better doctor in the end.
Here's what you do. Get her to open her mouth, take a handful, and throw it at her. Whatever sticks, that's the correct dosage.
Dosage. Not very good advice. If we don't know the dosage, we normally look it up in a formulary. And there was me at the beginning of this video saying how accurate the medicine would be. So when you work on a medical job, a couple times a week, a consultant will do a ward round and see all the patients. Yeah, pretty much every ward round you get quizzed by consultants on stuff you don't really know, and in front of patients as well, which can be sort of undermine your authority a little bit, but it's kind of part of the journey.
The necrosis and infected stool most likely indicate what, Dr. Dorian?
But consultants tend to have certain things that they like to talk about, so in time you sort of learn about those things and you can sort of get a step ahead of them.
Draining Miss Pratt's stomach fluid will get my spirits back up.
So we then see JD doing a procedure as part of one of his jobs.
Now just suck out the fluid with the giant needle.
Okay, the way they do this procedure is a little bit mad.
I think this needle's too big. I'm gonna get a nurse.
Come on, man. Learn by doing. Learn by doing.
So I think it might be quite interesting to talk about why they're doing it. So ascites, what this patient has, is a buildup of fluid in the abdominal cavity. So that's why the abdomen becomes very distended, very swollen. In the developed world, the main cause is liver disease, because as the liver becomes scarred, blood doesn't flow quite as well through it. So what happens is we get a buildup of pressure in the blood vessels entering the liver. This forces the fluid out of the blood vessels and therefore accumulates in the abdomen. One of the other jobs as the liver is to produce proteins. Now these proteins are quite big and they sit within the blood vessels, and these keep water in the blood vessels. Therefore, if the liver isn't working as well, it won't produce these proteins. So that's another reason why the fluid tends to leak out. There are two reasons why we drain the fluid off from ascites. The first one, we'd just take a small amount of fluid, and that's if we wanted to test it to find out the exact cause of it. The second one, if you imagine, if your tummy is very distended, it can be very painful, and sometimes if it's really bad, can make it even difficult to breathe. So this would be a therapeutic benefit. So we'd take it off to make people feel more comfortable. And this would mean us taking off a lot more fluid. In that circumstance, we'd leave a tube in place so we can slowly take off the fluid over hours and days. If this is ever a pub quiz question, we call this paracentesis or an ascitic tap. It looks like in Scrubs they're doing a diagnostic tap, so one to test the fluid, because they're only using a needle and not leaving a tube in place. Sometimes also use ultrasound beforehand as well to identify exactly where the fluid was and to make sure we miss any of the organs as well, otherwise we might put a needle into part of the bowel and cause some damage. And the reason why the fluid spurts everywhere is because they put the needle in a straight line rather than through the layers in a Z shape, which helps the layers seal themselves off. So then all of a sudden, JD's jobs are interrupted by his first cardiac arrest call.
My first code. See, here's how it works. Someone's heart fails, they beep everyone. The first doctor in has to run the room, tell everyone what to do, basically decide if the patient lives or dies.
We don't tend to run quite as fast as this in reality, more like a swift walk so we don't fall over and cause more problems. But you never forget your first cardiac arrest call. Mine was like something out of a medical drama actually. I was on a night shift, I was the first to arrive at the cardiac arrest team, and I was met with a patient face down in the middle of the floor with a pool of blood around their head, and they'd had a true cardiac arrest, so very quickly we had to just get him on his back, start CPR. Luckily for me, the clever doctors, the other senior doctors in the team were on hand very quickly to take the management forward. People getting it on within on-call rooms seem to be a common theme in all these medical dramas. I talked about it a bit in The Good Doctor. Just because we have beds in there doesn't mean we want to jump in them with other people. We're sort of sleep deprived enough. I think the last thing we want to do is get in with anyone else. We just want to sleep and maybe put some music on.
Hey, nurse! I'm a doctor, okay? The stethoscope's the beeper, a doctor, got it?
Female doctors getting mistaken for the nurse. This happens a lot.
Have a ball on call. Little poem for you.
So when you're working on call, you're either clerking the new patients or you're looking after the patients on the wards at weekends and nights. It is the busiest, most demanding work you do as a junior, and you really rely on other people to get you through it, and also people rely on you as well to get through it.
He crashed. The attending thinks it was a pulmonary embolism. No way anyone could have caught it.
I'll never forget that moment. The way he looked exactly the same, only completely different. The shame that all I could think about was how hard this was for me.
This is what being a doctor is like. This is it. I mean, the shame that all I could think about was how hard it was for me. We've all been there.
The hardest part is how quickly you have to move on. Don't worry, man, you're gonna be fine.
This shows a lot of insight into what it's like to be a doctor. Actually, I've had exactly this reflection. I've been called to confirm the death of a gentleman when I had a brutally busy on-call, and had this strange moment of tranquility with him, someone who I didn't know, and had to confirm his death. And then after that, I was back to being this human pinball bouncing around from one highly charged situation to another. And you only get to process everything sort of after the event. In the moment, you've just got to keep going. As JD said, the hardest part is how quickly you have to move on.
Even now, when I finally get to go home, in the back of my head I know the hospital's still here, wide awake.
And this is exactly right. It does freak me out to realise that the hospital is never closed. It was really apparent to me actually when I worked on the maternity ward. When I started, there was a group of us junior doctors, and there didn't seem to be very many of us, but at one point over the next few months, one of us would always be on that maternity ward, and it kind of freaked me out. The hospital, you know, you think of an office or a shop, it kind of has a sort of life cycle through the day. So the 9 to 5s are there, and then maybe the cleaners are there, and then maybe the security there, and then sometimes maybe there's no one there. But the hospital always has to just constantly be alive because people need medical help 24 hours a day.
But what the hell? The most important thing is that I got through my first 3 days without looking like a complete idiot.
So that's the end of the show. I don't know if you could tell, but I had an absolute blast. I was so super impressed with how the writers really get under the skin and root the story in reality. They must have done so much research. I don't think I really appreciated it when I first watched it before, but a lot of the medical science and things, I think that's what I used to like in medical dramas, because that was quite interesting. But actually the experiences and the relationships and the things that happen, that is what is exactly like real life. So I hope you like my light-hearted review of Scrubs. I'm sorry if it was a little bit kind of like about my experiences, but this is how I kind of saw it. It felt very much like my first day, and that's the closest thing I could relate it to, really. As always, thank you for all the support on the channel. You can check out some of my other videos where I look at some other medical TV dramas, but also some of my other content as well you may enjoy. Thank you very much again, and I'll see you soon.